Hi, I'm Kenneth, and this is the Unspeakable Vice podcast, where we talk about talking about sex. Sex is a dirty word, a taboo. It's something that just isn't talked about, and we're going to dig into why. So today I've got my friend Satvik with me, and we're going to talk about religion and desire. Satvik, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Satvik. I am a Wayne State student, undergrad, studying neuroscience and health psychology. I met Kenneth through Mind Meditate, which is a club that we started at Wayne State like almost a year back, and it's a pleasure to be on here.
It is a pleasure to have you here. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you about this is because I wouldn't, I mean, you're sort of an expert, but you're a student of religion, and I think that's the point here. You've been studying not only Eastern religions, but also religions in general. So I'm happy to have your insight um, into what we're talking about. From my perspective, religion and desire overlap in a way that sometimes can be troubling, and I don't think it needs to be. But with my past experience with religion, it's been all about telling me what I should or shouldn't think, what I should or shouldn't do, and that sometimes can cause shame, which when it
Which is
combines
not
with
helpful.
desire
Yeah,
can be difficult to deal with from an emotional and a sort of a mental health perspective.
exactly.
But so before we get into the details, um, what do we mean when we're talking about religion? I know you've got some thoughts on that.
Right. So when I think of religion, I think it's some sort combination of ethical conduct, some sort of moral principles, and then also a philosophy of some sort of divine concept. So whether that be the soul, spirit, or uh, any sort of metaphysical concept connecting to the physical realm. So there's these two combinations. So one is the material world where we live in, and then so each religion will have different sorts of principles of how you're supposed to live. You're not supposed to lie. You're not supposed to uh, you know steal. And these are basic principles, but then they'll go on and on and on about how you should apply them in your real life. And then they also have this concept of divinity, which is a certain prophet or certain cult will say that this is the one I follow, and that is because I'm a descendant of this prophet, or I'm a descendant of the group that followed this prophet, which told this is the God. And so this is basically religion at its core. And the reason why we have different religions, I think, is purely because of how the world is just how different prophets arose in different places in the world. So one prophet conceived of religion in this way, the other prophet conceived of religion in the other way. Like Jesus was in here and he founded Christianity. Buddha was in India, he found Buddhism. But it doesn't, I think, because of the places and the locations, I don't think it necessarily means the religion is different. I just think it's because the prophets conceived of it differently and called it different. So that's my take on religion and how it kind of connects. And you
Yeah,
know,
you're making me think of something that Yuval Noah Harari was talking about, and he used the word fictions to describe these ideas and concepts that people create to try to make sense of the world. And when he says fictions, he's not necessarily meaning they're false, but they're, I guess, invented in a way that they're and so this can be applied to religion, that religion provides sort of a way of thinking about things that isn't necessarily literal, and it's not necessarily tied to like the physical world, but it's a way of making sense of things and a way of putting things together, maybe simplifying things in a way that people can come together around the ideas and have a common language for that. and
mhm.
and for me, that's one way that I like to think about religion, is not that one's true and another one's false or something like that, but that each is sort of a different approach to trying to get at the truth, or get at some
Yep.
deeper understanding of the world, I guess.
And one quick point I like that is that because religion, the concept of religion always relies on understanding the truth. There's this whole concept of knowing what is real, who is the creator of all this world. This is the basic questions that all religious leaders question is like, what is real about the world, and who is the creator of the world, and where am I? Who am I? Who, like, what is a self? And so I think this is what distinguishes religion and philosophy, but then we'll talk about that later. Religion has some sort of metaphysical concept, which is why, since it's beyond words, whoever tries to use these words always goes on in a different path. So the truth is something that can only be conceived through the mind and not through linguistic terms. And so when someone tries to take something that's not something that can't be used by words, suddenly it loses its essence, and then we have these inconsistencies, and then we have the differences in religion. But essentially, they're saying the same thing. It's just because the language is used differently, we appear to, or they appear different. That's what I mean.
So let's talk about what you were just getting into, this sort of distinction between religion and philosophy, or what do you mean by that? And also thinking about the fact that most religions have some sort of rules or guidelines for how to behave, either how to act or how to think, or maybe both.
Yeah. So when we talk about philosophy, we talk about some sort of way of life. I so the best analogy is like when you buy a car, when you buy some sort of equipment, it comes with a manual. It comes with knowing how to build it, or it has some sort of step-by-step guide. But there is no step-by-step guide to life, right? And some people say that's good. Some people say each one has to decide how they want to live, and that's fine. But religions aim to give you this manual, or and but philosophy is what they do is they don't give you a manual. They analyze different manuals and come up with the basic underlying principle that is behind all these different religions. So one religion will give you a manual and say, this is how you live life. That's it. And that's what you're talking about, like how they tell you, they control your thought, they control your behavior, they control your
Right, right. And that was kind
relationships.
of the experience that I had growing up with being in a Catholic church. There were a lot of rules. There were a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things that I was supposed to do or was supposed to not do, and the sort of why was maybe a little bit buried in there. But the point was somebody else sort of decided these are the things that are
Yeah.
good for you. These are the things that you should be focused on. So just do that. But that's
And
obviously not
so
true for every religion, right?
yes. And so what philosophy does instead is, instead of just telling you what to do and giving you the manual, it tells you the why, like you said, and it also compares different philosophy, compares different religions, excuse me, and sees what's the underlying principle behind them. So we can say, okay, one religion may be biased, the other religion may be biased, but certainly if there's something, a commonality between every single religion, there must be something there. There must be some sort of truth there. If every single religion has a commonality, and philosophy studies these basic concepts. So almost every religion has a concept of telling the truth. And so philosophers like Socrates and Plato will ask, like, what is the truth? Why do we want to say the truth? Um, Most religions have some sort of basis on sexuality, like the thing we're talking about today, desire. Why do humans need to study desire, and what do different religions say? But then how does it affect the human in this life, and then in the lives consequent after that too? So this concept of understanding why we're supposed to do something is always there in philosophy, and it's not just blind faith.
And yeah, so we're talking about a lot of different things here, but ultimately getting to that idea of desire, and in particular sexual desire. And desire, I think, is a part that religion can be particularly focused on. And as I'm thinking about it, just as we're talking right now, maybe it's not the core of the religion itself, but it's more of the culture around it or the society around it that makes sexuality into a particularly pointed issue
Mm-hmm.
with that. So most religions do address sexual desire in a particular way and regulate it, or discuss it in a way that has some significance, and some more than others. I
Hmm.
know there are many religious communities here in the West that make a seem to put that particular issue higher up than any other issue. Um, in Christianity, there's talk about um, different forms of sin, different things that people can do less than the ideal, and whether it's lying or
Hmm.
stealing. But when it comes to sexual things that are forbidden or frowned upon, that really seems to get people's attention in a way that goes beyond the other issues. And I think at the core of the religion, that's not necessarily true. If you just read the literal text of the Bible, for example,
Yep.
all these sins are kind of put in the same level. But when it comes to the
Hmm.
culture, that's when people sort of pick certain ones that they think are particularly serious, and sexuality tends to be at the top of or near the top of
Well,
the list.
one thing I do like to bring up is uh, sometimes it becomes a hot topic because of how strongly because of its inclination to get people to follow you in a way. So this sense of authority that you're talking about, sense of control, uh, you can control a lot of people by this topic, and sociologically, it gives you that locus of control. It gives you that ability to get people's attention, but then also repress them. And this is not a healthy way to control people, but unfortunately, a lot of Western religions, in some cases, I do see some instances of Eastern religions using this topic of sexuality in a way to control people in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, so that issue of control comes up, and like I said, maybe this is more cultural than at the foundation of the religion, but we've
Mm-hmm.
seen that in the Roman Catholic Church over its history, and with the Protestant Church in the United States, that there's a structure that attempts to exert control, for one purpose or another, whether it's obedience to the emperor, or if it's I'm thinking of the Protestant work ethic that sort of focuses people on being a good worker and contributing to the growth economy, and driving industrial capitalism in a way that creates profit for people who are in control of those social structures. But let's sidestep that and look at maybe the more virtuous aspects of
Yep.
religion and philosophy that have to do with either the individual approaching life and finding something good there, or even as a community, but not necessarily in terms of control, but rather in terms of um, I don't know, spiritual prosperity.
Yeah.
What are the more beneficial things that can come out of religion besides these control structures?
Yeah. So religion, I think, um, so if you can use it in two ways. So this is what kind of Karl Marx said: religion is the opium of for people, because it really can be used as a terrible way to control people. But that doesn't necessarily mean the individual religions themselves are evil. It just means that the phenomena of religion is just it can be used in an inappropriate way. But I think there's appropriate ways too. So we can't just look at the one side of the coin. We have to look at the other side. And this is what you're talking about, the virtuous sides. So here, there's a lot of virtuous things, and I would like to specifically look at Buddhism here and see like what are the five things that the Buddha preached that are virtuous to do. So
Okay.
I think you probably mentioned it. So the first one is saying the truth. And this can have applications in like relationships too, like always making sure that you're saying the truth, nothing but the truth. And this is some sort of purity in itself, but then it also has sociological perspectives where you have better friendships, you have better relationships, you have better, in general, business corporations are able to, ethically work with people and not manipulate them and things like that. So trust is a big one. So that's the first thing. Second one is not taking what is not, or not taking what is not given to you, or so basically not stealing. So truth, and then stealing, not stealing. And then the third one is intoxicants. So making sure that you don't take any mind altering drugs.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
and then the fifth one is uh, I'm missing one more. I forgot, but the fifth one is ethical or sexual misconduct. And so when he talks about sexual misconduct, it just means um, not having one relationship and going out in the world and having all sorts of different uh, women or all sorts of different partners, and not having a set person, a set partner with marriage.
One
So
of
that
the
those are the
things
five
that,
things. Let me just quickly finish. Sorry. So those
yeah.
are the five things that he kind of mentioned. I forgot one. I'll try to remember as I kind of talk. But I think these five, I think they almost comprise of everything we do in life. There may be something else out there, but it's important that we don't take these literally and say that these are the rules. These five things basically guide you to live your life as an ethical person, and they do give you some sort of personal benefit, but then also it creates some sort of social harmony too. So this sense of control that you said, it's right, and a lot of priests do preach, and tell people to do this or that. But I think the fundamental core that the Buddha taught was working on yourself and not worrying so much about what the other person does. And if each individual works on themselves and does their work and follows these five principles, you can think that there would be no sense of conflict here. And so this is exactly what we talk when we talk about, doing your job and making sure that you do your work and not worry about what other person does. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about following the virtuous deeds and making sure that you're an ethical person, regardless of what the other person does or says. And so this applies in relationships too. Like if you work ethically in a relationship, the other person may not necessarily follow it. The other person may not reciprocate your virtuous deeds, but that doesn't necessarily mean you abandon them. And this is where the whole principle of hatred cannot seize with hatred, hatred seizes only with love comes into place, where you have to have some sort of ethical conduct where in the basis of ethical conduct is truth, not stealing, not having these mind altering drugs, because the mind is the most important organ we have for rationality. And then the missing one and the fifth one is
Okay. So
sexual misconduct.
I've got the list in front of me now. Not killing was one,
Not killing. Yeah.
not stealing, the refrain from sexual misconduct that you mentioned, not telling lies or falsehoods, and then not intoxicating the mind with um, substances or whatever. One of the things, what I was going to say is one of the things I like about the way the Buddha presents these is that they're sort of open-ended. So the one about intoxication, for example, is sort of, it says don't use intoxicants, don't cloud the mind, but it doesn't really go into detail about what that actually means. And so it requires the individual to think about that and decide for themselves what would be considered a clear mind, what would be considered a cloudy mind, and how to
Yep.
how to determine that. The other part about usually how it's presented is it's not just a negative, but there's a positive, sort of counter aspect to that. So
Yep.
don't kill, but then support the right to life and the kindness
Yeah.
and compassion that goes along with that. Sort of valuing life.
And
You can look at it as either a negative or a positive.
yeah. And so the last point that I missed was actually the most important one, the value to life. I think that's where all the other ones come into play too, is because we have this fundamental core to value life, not just ours, but other people around us too. And because we have this concept of valuing life and valuing, so when he talks about life, he doesn't necessarily mean the the physical life, he also means the mental life too. So the suffering people face,
Okay.
and in general, and making sure that you're not, it's not just not killing people, but then also not having this tendency to see people below you, or this concept of aggression and anger are also ways to kind of mentally kill them. That if you put it that way. So in general, just having a tendency to having this sort of loving kindness, but then also making sure that you don't develop these other attitudes like anger and aggression.
Yeah. So we're talking about some of these rules and some of these guidelines. Let's think specifically about desire. How does desire interact with these guidelines? And I guess there's two ways that the rules we've sort of gone into this a little bit, but the rules can sort of either prohibit or require or promote a certain behavior, but they can
Mm-hmm.
also um, regulate or talk about certain types of thought processes and mental activity. So how thinking about desire, um, there are some of those actions. Well, I guess I don't know if you have thoughts
Yeah,
particularly about desire, but I guess
yes.
thinking about those actions like don't steal, well, there's presumably a desire to possess something that you don't
Mm-hmm.
have,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
how would you interpret those rules just in general, not even just particularly the Buddhist rules, but
Yeah, so in general, there's always a conflict, regardless of what you have. There's always a conflict between the quote unquote good, or what we call wholesome and unwholesome states, or there's always a conflict between should I do this or should I do that. There's this dualistic viewpoint that there's either the right or the wrong. This concept, should I do this or that? And this conflict is what causes us to do things that we regret and we may feel shameful of later, or things like that. But if we get rid of this conflict, so desire in itself is not wrong. And the Buddha, when he taught desire, he said the action of desire is not wrong. It's the craving that lies behind it. So taking particularly like stealing, for example, if you're in the moment of stealing something and it's absolutely required, there are moral dilemmas in certain cases where stealing can be justified. But if you're in the moment of stealing, then stealing is fine. But if you're thinking of stealing, there are these thoughts, there's this craving that you don't have something, and then you're not actually you're not in the present moment of doing it. You're actually you're preoccupied by the thought of doing it. That is what the Buddha says not to do, because that is a falsehood. That is something that your mind creates. Same thing with sexuality, and this kind of makes more sense, is that the actual deed of sex is not bad in itself. If you're doing it in the moment, go ahead and fully engage in the moment. But if you're craving for it, if you're not in the moment of doing it, but you're thinking about it, but you're kind of fantasizing it, and it's natural, of course, as human minds are so imaginative, and we have the tendency to always go in the past and the future. It's common. I'm not saying that it's easy, but we have to understand that if it's not in the present moment, it it tends to lead to suffering, because that aspect of going for something that you already don't have is what creates dissatisfaction. And this is what the Buddha really wanted to teach, and that's why he had these 5 principles, is because these principles are good to follow guidelines, but if at some certain point you have to do them, it's okay, but make sure that you're not, you don't have this tendency to do it again and again, again and again and again. And also just be aware of, after you're done with it, how do you feel? What's the state of mind? The Buddha always asks you to reflect over yourself. And this is not just the Buddha, all other religions I know, in Christianity too, they believe that you should always have some sort of questioning or some sort of rationality behind what you're doing. And so, if you read the Bible, or if you go to the church, there are also these discussion groups. I've heard from some of my friends that they have these discussion groups come together in smaller groups and talk about these things, because not all churches do this, but some of the Catholic churches do this, where they encourage youth to come together. Am I
Yeah,
can you
absolutely.
hear me?
I
Am
never
I shaky?
personally experienced that with the Catholic Church, but when I was in college, I was with a church group that every week they encouraged everyone to be a part of a small group, and they helped coordinate that. And it was exactly what you're saying. It was a time to sort of get into the discussion about the details and also sort of the practical aspects of
Yeah.
how
So,
these rules
but
manifest during a life and how to deal with them.
but do you
I,
get the point about how it's not about the disease or
right,
the action of
right.
desire?
And
It's
I
actually more
think
about the
it's definitely
craving.
interesting
Yeah.
to think back to my experience when I was uh, in the Catholic Church, and one of the rules, of course, is not to have sex outside of marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would think about this rule and um, find myself uh, just sort of fantasizing about sex in general, and then I would think
Mm-hmm.
about that thought and say, well, okay, I'm
Yeah.
thinking
Then you
about
get in the loop
sex,
of
but I'm
thoughts.
not
Yeah.
thinking about marriage, and so what? And there's even a line from the Bible. I don't have the exact quote, but basically it says if you even think about someone else's wife, you're already committing adultery in your
Mm-hmm.
heart.
Yeah.
And so that sort of thinking, that sort of rules would get me thinking shameful thoughts about myself, that because
Yep.
I had these desires or fantasies or just ruminations, um, even though I wasn't presently acting on them and had no intention to, just the thought, the fact that the thought was in my head made me feel like there was something wrong with me and that I should be doing something to not have these thoughts. And so it ended up being a much more troubling issue than the thought itself, because I had all these other thoughts
Yeah.
that went to how terrible this thought is. Um, so how,
And so it
what
goes back to the
just for
concept of present. Yeah.
right. So how
Sorry.
would this how would the Buddhist approach look at that differently than what I was doing?
Yeah. So the way you would look at it would be, okay, so I have a thought, and then I have a thought about the thought, right? And then so you have this cycle of thinking, and this is what creates the suffering actually. So in fact, in this case, the Buddha would tell you it's not the action of sex that's bad necessarily. It's actually your own thoughts about it and your distinction of this is right, this is wrong. That is what is the root of your dissatisfaction here. And so what he would tell you is that instead of trying to suppress your mind into believing or suppress your mind to follow these rules, just engage your mind in the good things. Don't worry about suppressing these. These will naturally go away. Just engage your mind in virtuous deeds. And the more and more you engage your mind in the virtuous deeds, these unwholesome states or these, quote unquote, unlawful things that religion may say as not good, they will go naturally. It happens naturally. You can't force yourself to get rid of something. It has to happen naturally, and it can only happen naturally when your mind is engaged in something good or something that's a step higher. And the other thing that Buddha would say was realizing that there are dangers in certain thinking. And so one of the dangers in this loop of thinking, I'm not good enough, or I'm not, I'm thinking about bad things and things like that. One of the dangers is that you never fix the problem. You never fix
Hmm.
the problem. You just think about it. And so the way to fix the problem is to engage yourself in wholesome deeds. And so doing virtuous deeds, helping other people, volunteering, um, and things like that. So you bring up a good point. I was actually reading about this today. Each of the five things that we talked about in general, any ethical conduct, there's a right view to it and the wrong view to it. And when you do the wrong thing, you feel like you have done the wrong thing. But in reality, you have just done something that the human mind has called wrong. So it's labeled as wrong and has consequences, but you feel like you're entitled to that wrong thing. You're not entitled to that wrong thing. It just what we have labeled as wrong. It's just something that has a cause and effect. That's it. So just because it has wrong or bad effects doesn't mean the cause itself is bad. It just it might be something that leads to bad effects. And that's why the human society has called it bad. But it's just one action, right? So I think the bigger picture here is kind of understanding that what I was saying about earlier is that really, really making sure that you're not caught up in the cycle of trying to see this is right or this is wrong necessarily, but just doing your work, doing the virtuous deeds at every single moment. And then if thoughts come, let them come. Okay, I'm thinking about sex. Okay, I'm thinking about sex. I'll go back to doing work. I'll go back to reading. I'll go back to walking, whatever. Let the thoughts come. It's fine. You can't control the thoughts. You can only control your behavior.
So yeah, that makes sense. So one thing that I was thinking, and this is maybe something that happens commonly in with people who have been raised in a Christian background, but I'm not sure. But anyway, so they might have a particular desire that they've labeled as wrong, or that somebody told them was wrong. Say, I'm thinking about sex with a particular person who's where it would be inappropriate to engage in that. And so I identify that thought
Mm-hmm.
as wrong. And so what I might be inclined to do is substitute that with something else. Maybe I'll turn to pornography or alcohol or tobacco or something like that
Mm,
that can sort of give me a sense of pleasure that's but in a
mm-hmm.
way that's not labeled as wrong, right? So it's
Yeah.
not, and maybe it's a wholesome and good thing too. Maybe I can say, instead of focusing on sex with this person, maybe I can focus on uh, um, helping people in a virtuous way, but it's still, as a substitute to fulfill that sort of
Yeah.
desirous need
Yeah.
for something in myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a tendency that people do sometimes. It's just substituting one desire for another.
Substitute. Yep.
But
Yep.
what I indicated was
But
that
make sure so
it's
you
maybe
substitute.
in the Eastern thought is less about a particular desire and more about desire in general, right? Which is kind of what you're saying, that you just sort of
Yeah.
let the desires come, or let the thoughts come, and then let them go.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
want to? Does that?
But
Am I
but
making
make
sense
sure
there?
you substitute. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, exactly what you said. But when you do substitute, make sure you don't substitute to a worse behavior. So you always want to substitute to something that's a little bit higher. Okay. So
Okay.
for example, stealing. So you have thoughts of stealing. So you're like, I'm gonna substitute with the thoughts of, I don't know, having some sort of manipulation. I'm gonna have some sort of stock manipulation or whatever, or some sort of unethical conduct of getting money. Um, that that is still worse than that. So that is, you may perceive that to be better than stealing because you're not actually going out there and taking someone. You're indirectly taking it, but it doesn't make it better. Instead, if you change it and you substitute with something better, for example, like, okay, I don't have enough money, I need to get something. How about I ask my friend and do some work for him, or not work necessarily, or help him out and just ask him for some money. That kind of gets, so going back to the rules, that kind of gets the one that says not taking what is not given. You're asking for it. So of course it's violating it, but it's not violating it necessarily as much as stealing did. So you see what I mean by like substituting it with a little better behavior, just so you're not degrading yourself further. You're just improving a little by little.
I guess in Catholicism, and I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not quoting any experts, but maybe the only or the best desire would be the desire for God, the desire to commune with God and to experience things on that ultimate spiritual level. Um, but and so any other desire would be less than ideal, and
It
maybe
would
some
be
are
less, it
more
would be less,
better than
but
others in some regard. But I guess what I'm getting at is that um the so from the Buddhist perspective, it's not so much a particular desire that's either good or bad, but it's desire
as a
as a
whole, yeah.
concept in itself, right? This grasping at something that I don't have, whether that something
Yeah.
is a beautiful person that I like to have sex with, or if it's a fancy car or a great job or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that I
Mm-hmm.
desire, I mean, we can say that some of these things are better than others in terms of how they influence ourselves or influence other people's
Yeah.
quality of life. But ultimately, that desire, that grasping, is something that's where the real issue is, not
Yep.
in the object of the desire, but in the desire itself. Does that make
Desire.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, you worded it perfectly fine. I think I would like to add that when you talked about the desire for God, I think it's a good perspective to have. I think that perspective naturally lets you go off the smaller desires, and some people have a difficulty to do this. But how about we word it differently? How about we say the desire to be a good person, just the desire to be a virtuous person, and that in itself will motivate you to get rid of some of these maybe on you know, so quote unquote wrong things that we do that they're not really wrong, but they're just lower desires. That's all it means to. And instead we focus on just being a virtuous person. And there is merit to saying this. The reason why that desire is so strong is because it leads to better, peaceful mind. It leads to a calm mind. If you do good things, the law of karma says, if you engage in good things, naturally good things will happen to you. And so you don't have to do anything to be happy. It comes to you. It literally, just like getting a car, you crave for it and then you get it. But that's not real happiness. That's just a temporal view of happiness. The real happiness is something that you already have. All you just have to do is just look for it and just do the good things. And it's not even dependent on good things. The good things just allow you to see it. The happiness is already there within you. And I think Christianity also has the same perspective that God is omnipresent. He's in you. He's everywhere. And it just, you are not able to see him because of your impure mind. That's it. And so that similarly, Hinduism and also Buddhism and even I've read a little bit about Islam too. They all say the same thing, is that God is everywhere, but because of our impure deeds and our impure minds, we're not able to necessarily perceive him.
I like that. Yeah. A couple days ago, you shared a quote with me, from the Buddha, I believe, where he said, "There is not a single unwholesome state as strong as the craving for the attractiveness of the female for a man, or a man for a female." Never mind the heteronormative undertones there, but obviously he's talking about attraction and probably sexual attraction, right?
Yes.
What stands out to you about that particular claim, and why do you think that's so strong? That particular craving is so strong.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that if the Buddha did see someone that was gay or non-binary, he would have probably mentioned that too. But it was just that he never saw anyone in India at that time that was like that. That's why his language is like that. And so, in fact, there are in Hinduism, I've seen many goddesses, and even in Tibetan Buddhism, there's many deities that are seen as male and female together. So the first of all, I would just like to say that the the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism do not deny uh, non-binary sexual identities and other gender roles. But here, what the Buddha is saying is he's mentioning that the biggest hurdle to overcome is the attractiveness, because it really is conditioned deep within our brains. And at that time, we didn't have knowledge of neuroscience, but now we do. And we realize how strongly the desire for being in love, and not just being in love, but this desire for sexuality, or this sexual intercourse, is so strong, and it's conditioned because think about it this way, right? Every single being that came into existence had to reproduce in some way, and so reproduction is something so ingrained. If we are alive, it's it's because of reproduction. And so naturally, the way nature works, and you don't even need God in this case. The way nature works itself is it self-replicates, and the
Right.
only way nature it can do this is by having a strong system that allows people to reproduce and have this desire for reproduction. That's the only way nature can work. And so it's inbuilt in our nature to have this strong desire. And that's why the Buddha says this is the strongest desire, because this is something that is so hard to overcome because it's the fundamental principle of life. If we can overcome this, then we have overcome everything. And it's not necessarily saying that you have to overcome this right away, but have this mindset, or have this mindset that, at some point I'm gonna have to let go of this too, and it's gonna be hard, but I at some point, whether it be now or later, if I get old, a lot of times old people do get this perspective that, you know, when they get old, they lose their sexual tendencies. They feel like, oh, now I'm trying to understand life more than just the desires for sex. And so at some point you realize this, whether it be when if you're young or old, doesn't matter, but at some point you realize is that there's something this strong tendency you had at this point is not the end and be all
Right.
for all. It's more than that.
Fantastic. Well, I thank you for sharing your thoughts on this subject, and I really appreciate your time. Um, if there's anything else any last words you want to say, I'll invite you to do that.
No, that's it. I think thank you for inviting me here. It was a nice discussion we had. I learned a lot because I think when you share some things resonate with you, and some things you realize maybe I should think a little bit more about that. And so like these cognitive biases we may have, they certainly are just they're overcome in the process of discussion. So thank you for having me, and thank you for watching.
Okay, great. Yeah.